Welcome to Chapter 2. In this chapter, we're going to write some bass clefs. Write some low notes to go along with them. Match low notes on the keyboard with notes on the staff. Write eighth notes. Identify notes on ledger lines. Identify sharps and flats on the keyboard. Write sharps and flats on the staff. And we're also going to write some enharmonic equivalents. Lots of fun stuff. Let's get moving. Quick review. Here is our treble clef. Treble clef is also known as the G clef because the curly part of the treble clef circles the G line. I've got a note drawn on G right here. Remember the mnemonic device for the lines and spaces of the treble clef staff. We have face in the spaces from bottom to top, F-A-C-E. And then from bottom to top we sometimes use the saying, every good boy does fine, to remember the lines. Or you could be creative. Elvis's Guitar Broke Down Friday. Anything you come up with to help you remember is great. But if you want to use either of those two, that's fine. So we have face, every good boy does fine. Now, in this chapter, we really want to do some focus on the bass clef. Think about your car stereo, or any stereo for that matter, in adjusting the equalizer. If you turn the treble up on your stereo, you are adjusting the high notes. Treble clef refers to high notes. Now, if you turn up the bass on your stereo, you're amplifying the low notes. And here we go. We have a bass clef right here. The bass clef is also known as the F clef. We're going to write a lot of our lower notes on there. So we should be able to logically understand that the bass clef refers to the lower notes, and the G clef or treble clef refers to the higher notes. The bass clef is known as the F clef because the two dots that you use when you draw it are drawn on either side of the F line. Super important, because if you remember we were talking about reference points, this G above middle C and the F below middle C are going to be used quite often when you are writing your music. And here's middle C. I'm going to draw that right in there, right in between the staves. Okay? Now, a lot of people, when they're trying to use mnemonic devices for the bass clef, we have A, C, E, G for the spaces. Most commonly I see all cows eat grass. And in Nebraska, that's very fitting, wouldn't you say? Now, for the lines, we have G, B, D, F, and A. And I learned many different ones, but my favorite one is George Bush drives fast always. I think it's very easy and kind of fun to know. George Bush drives fast always. Whatever you need to come up with to help you to remember that, do so, because you're going to refer back to that mnemonic device quite often. If you want to write any of this down, go ahead and pause it and write it down. If not, we're going to move on. Here we have both a treble clef and a bass clef on their own staff, but they are connected by this brace. In music, when you see a treble clef and bass clef staff that are put together, we refer to them both together as the grand staff. And in music, we use this a lot because we will write both bass notes and treble notes. So the grand staff will be used quite often, and you'll have lots of practice drawing it. So there should be no issues there. To do a little bit more review, let's talk about the different note types we worked on. Of course, we had the whole note, which often had 4 beats. Then we had the half note, which has 2 beats. And we also learned about the quarter note, which has 1 beat. I do want to point out how the stem direction works. We have the note head, which is the round part. Sometimes it's round, sometimes it's oval. As long as it's clear, and if I can tell whether it's on a line or space, we're good. Then we have the stem. Now, out of these 3, only the half note and the quarter note have a stem. Now, how do we know whether the stem points up or down? Well, that's very simple. Well, if we have a note on the middle line or higher, that stem is going to point towards the middle of the staff, otherwise known as down. So if I'm going to draw a quarter note, above the middle line, all of the stems are always going to face down. Now, if I draw something below the middle line, such as on A, then the stem is going to point up. And you will notice that when its stem comes down, it's on the left side of the note head. When the stem has to point upward, it's going to be on the right side of the note head. It may not seem like a very important thing to remember, but as you go through, you're going to want to make sure that this is correct because it makes it much easier to read in the grand scheme of things. Now let's talk about eighth notes. We have whole notes, we have half notes, we have quarter notes. What is half of a quarter? An eighth. It always breaks down by the halves. Now, the eighth note is solid, just like a quarter note. It has a stem, but to make it different, it has a flag on it. You don't have to be very specific with how you draw the flag. I'm more concerned that it's obvious that there is one. It can be swoopy, curvy, as long as there's just some extra line on there. That's what I'm worried about. Now, you may see things that look like this as we go through the music, where we have two notes. We have note heads. They have stems, and they're connected by this little crossbar. Well, we are going to be calling that crossbar a beam. It's very important, and a beam connects eighth notes together. So, if we have any number of eighth notes, 2 or more, we can, if we want to, connect them with a beam. Just like that. So, the eighth notes will either just have a flag, if they're separate, that little flag on there, or if there's more than one and we want to connect them together, we can use that. It's almost like we take the flags and tie them together and make a beam. Very easy to recognize if you think about it, but you'll have plenty of opportunities to write that. Let's move on. There are 88 keys on a standard keyboard, from low to high. Now, there are not 88 lines and spaces between the top of the treble clef staff and the bottom of the bass clef staff. Now, we are not limited to just that amount of notes. We can actually go above or below the staff using what we like to call ledger lines. And I'll write that on there so that it's a little bit easier for you to think about. Ledger lines. Okay? So let's say we are moving up in whole notes. We have a whole note, whole note, whole note. Okay, I'm at the top of the staff. Now, there exists above the staff and below the staff a space right there, just right above that top line. If we want to go above that space, there has to be an extension of the staff, almost like a mini staff line, that we call a ledger line. And all that is a line that we insert and we draw the next note up. Now we can do that below the staff as well. We could have a note here, a note on the line here. There's that space that we create right there below the line. Then we have to insert a ledger line, put in another note. Now, as you notice, as I move up, we go line, space, line, space, line, space, line, space. Now, I went space here, line here. What is going to go next in our sequence? Line, space, line. Well, below that line has to exist another space there. Now, we cannot just draw a note lower because it may be confused as this note here. Maybe this was supposed to be that, but we didn't write it high enough. Now, to make that difference, we just keep that ledger line right there so that we know that there is a space here a line there, and that this note is on the space below that. And we can do that for as many notes as we want to. It just depends on the needs that we have. So if I want to go below that last note that I wrote, I would need 2 ledger lines, and our note would go on there because this was on the space below this line. So that means after this space we need another line, and we just put that note right on the line. And we can keep doing that for as long as we want, as many times as we need. And you'll have plenty of practice doing that when we start writing scales. Let's move on. Let's talk about sharps and flats. Here's a great diagram of the notes on the staves corresponding to notes on the keyboard. Here we have middle C. If you follow the lineup, there's middle C. There's B. Followed up, there's B. It's a great diagram. Now, the notes correspond to white keys on the keyboard, but how do we notate a black key? Well, in the chapter it talks about sharps and flats, which we need to start talking about so that we can use those keys. A sharp with a note means to play a half step up. A flat with a note means to play a half step down. A half step on a keyboard simply means the very next key, left or right. So, if I wanted to go a half step up from this E, I would play F. If I wanted to go a half step up from F, I would have to play this black key because it's the very next key over. So whether black or white, it's the very next key if you're moving by half steps. A half step below A is this black key below A. Half step below that is G. Half step below that is the black key below G. So on and so forth. The pattern repeats itself. Those are half steps. So, if I wanted to take, let's say, this A here, and I wanted to make it sharp, so I'm going to put a sharp next to it. Find A on the keyboard, go a half step up, there's a sharp. Bada bing, pretty simple. Sharps go up, flats go down. If I wanted to take this D right here, every good boy does D right there. If I wanted to make that flat, I'm going to draw a flat right in there, then I would find the D on the keyboard and go a half step to the left or down, and there it is, that black key right there. Now, we can be a little tricky with a couple keys. Where you see these two groups, the groups of two white keys, B and C, E and F, B and C, E and F, kind of gets a little weird. If I made E sharp, find my E, da-da-dun-da-da, there's E, make it sharp. Oh my goodness, it looks just like an F. It may look the same on the keyboard, but on the staff, an E sharp looks like that, and an F looks like this. However, an F and an E sharp are played the same way. Now I could also do that with C flat. So here's my C, I'm going to make it flat. C up here, C flat. Oh my goodness, it looks just like a B. And just like before with the last example, even though it looks like the same note on the keyboard, on the staff it's completely different. Because here's a B, here's a C flat. You play the same key on the keyboard, but they look different. Flats go down, sharps go up. The name for notes that look different on the staff, but look the same on the keyboard, is called enharmonic equivalence. Very important. We want to be aware of that as we move on. Alright. Here's a little breakdown of the things we learned in this chapter. Go ahead and pause it at any time that you want to. and take a look at it, take any notes you might need, and come tomorrow prepared for your lesson.